Daf Mesechtas Beitzah Daf Gimel. We begin 8 lines down at the top of the Yomid, where we finish up a discussion we started in the previous Daf regarding halacha the Mishnah. If manichnes and mugman b'yamtiv, if you could put stuff on coals and yamtiv, continue with that discussion regarding putting certain peiros on top of the coals and yamtiv, that's permitted or not. Shiz Kozbaz Bekasik and Chesko to end them Daf Hashem joining today's Daf. So we're going to discuss in today's Daf are 3 halachas of Shabbos and Yom Tov, in which Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was more lenient than the Chacham. That's the next Mishnah. Regarding the halacha of Davashin Miskaven, something that's unintended, but it's a malacha is a mutter, or Davashin Miskaven is asur on Shabbos and Yom Tov. The halachas of a pepper mill on Yom Tov, and then the following Mishnah, as it relates to unrelated, but related to the laws of Tumah. The laws of Tumas Medrash, as it relates to a child's toy wagon. So Mekitim is a concept discussed in today's Davar Shpisis Behemta, which a person has an obligation, not only that he shouldn't do a malacha, but that even that his animal shouldn't do a malacha. Tavashein Miskaven is something that someone's doing that's unintended, but it's happening through his action. And Tumas Medrash is when there's a zav, a zava, that when they're in the Abba Tumah, when they lay or sit on a bed or a chair, that object itself now has the same Abba Tumah as they have. So begin the current Daf. First we're finishing up the discussion from the previous Daf, and then we'll start the next Mishnah. The Gemara is 8 lines down the top of the Daf Chav Gimel and Al. Rava Amar, he says, like Shmuel, which we had a discussion on the previous Daf. It was 3 lines up from the bottom of the Yomid. The Gemara asked Ma'ala Ashen. The Gemara asked, what's the halacha regarding smoking? Which was regarding if you're taking your produce, your fruits, and you're smoking with besamim, that it should get the taste of the besam. So Shmuel had said that it's mutter, and we had the Rabbi Yirmiyah that said that it's asr. So Rava is continuing on that halach, and he says that it's permitted to put it onto the coals. And he says, he says even on the coals itself, it's permitted because there was this discussion regarding a few different elements. One we had was, maybe it's moiled reicha. It's going to go ahead and maybe put a smell into the earthenware or the coals that you're putting it on. Or let's say we had a problem of, let's say, mechaba and maver. So Rava says no, it's not a problem. You're allowed to even put it onto the coals because, as Rashi explains, it's oichel nefesh when you're smoking this peiros, and it's shabbal chol nefesh. This is something that everybody would like. What's with all the 3 problems we mentioned in the previous stuff? With extinguishing the coals and igniting the produce or whatever it is that you're putting onto the coals, and that you're giving a reach into the things that, let's say, you're burning it on. So that's what says Rabbi Midi have a bisa gumer. It's just like anytime you put meat on coals, you're allowed to go ahead and make a barbecue on Yom Tov, and it's permitted. The reason for that is because it's feichel nefesh, so therefore it's not going to be forbidden. Similarly, the Gemara brings the dovish of Geviyah mi Beikasel. Rabbi from Beikasel, he darshaned a pischa de beirish galusa by the opening of the house of the Rish Galusa, and he said Ketura shari. That's how he darshaned. He didn't say exactly what he means. He just says Ketura is permitted. So Malay Amema said to him, my Ketura. Well, what do you mean when you say Ketura? The word Ketura could have more than one interpretation. Iketura v'yadei, if it means that the word Keture would mean like a term of kesher. Tes and shin are interchangeable, where they would make for the leggings or for sleeves of women's blouses or garments, that they press them on a flat piece of wood or on a bundle of straw. And that's what you're saying, you're allowed to do keturi on Yom Tov, you're allowed to knot it. But ma'aseh, that's a craftsman act, this knot that they're making, and that should be forbidden. How are you allowed to do that on Yom Tov? Avila ashen. And if you talk about smoking, which that's like kitur, is a terminology of like ketairis, a term of the smoking of the oven, well, also that should be forbidden, the halka machaba, because you're extinguishing. So how can you say that's permitted also? Amalei Ravashi says loyal ma'ashin. Yes, when he said ketura, he meant instead of smoking, that this was saying that you let us smoke the produce is midahava bisagumer. It's just that when you're putting meat on the coals, and you're smoking your meats or whatever, that's permitted. So too, it's the same thing over here by the produce that's going to be permitted. Ikadam does say that Amalei Amema said to him, my ketura. He says a slightly different. two questions he asked him. The first one was the same, but the second one was different. My couture, what's couture? Couture biyadi, it means to say by the sleeves. So my somanu, that's a craftsman, I'll do that on Yom Tov. And ila ashen, if it's to smoke the produce, he said instead of saying yomachaba, he asked the other question. Also the kamal reicha, because you're giving it you're putting in the smell, which that's the rabbinic isser of moilid, of making a new entity. So how could he have said, which that's according to some interpretations was the source of electricity being also you're putting in something that it never had before. So you're being moilid a reich. So how could you say that would be permitted? Rabashi says, he says, I told this to him. And I said it to him in the name of a great person. Yes, truthfully talking about smoking it. It's putting in a new reich, and moilid. But just like when you're putting meat on the coals, you're putting in a smell into the coals, and because you're getting the smell of the meat, and still it's permitted because of Eichel Nefesh. So to over here, La'ashna Saperis is going to be permitted for the same reason. You're allowed to do Malacha for Eichel Nefesh, and again they consider it Shabbat L'chol Nefesh, and therefore that would be permitted to be done on Yom Tov. Now the third thing that we had mentioned in the Mishnah, Gamliel did three things leniently on Yom Tov, was Va'isni Gedim Kulas. He made an armored goat, which basically means to say you take the entrails, you take all the intestines, and you put it on the outside like an armed warrior. And he would do that on the nights of Pesach. Starting in the Brisa that Rabbi Yisrael, he says, Toidish ish Roimi. Toidish, the man from Rome, Hinigas b'nei Roimi, he made the custom for the people of Rome, Lechel Gedi Mekulas b'leil Pesachim, to eat this Gedi that was armored on the night of Pesach. And Shalchalei, they sent him, Ilmoli Toidis Ata. If not that you're Toidis, meaning that you're great and honorable person, because we would decree on you that you should be excommunicated. Because you're giving the Jewish people kachim to eat outside of the base of Mikdash in Rome. Were you entertaining that he's giving them kachim? What does it mean he's giving them kachim? How could it be kachim? No one sanctified it. Rather say ain't kachim. It's like kachim. So that what they sent him was that you're feeding the Jewish people. It looks like a carbon. Because someone's going to say, oh, it's a carbon Pesach. Yeah, of course, we eat the carbon Pesach on the Seder night, and that was sanctified for the Pesach, and it's going to give the appearance of wrongdoing, and therefore we would excommunicate you, but we don't because you're a great person. That was the third thing. Malil also did leniently that he ate. He made a gedima kulas on the lipsach, but again, the Chacham say it's aser because it looks like kachim b'chutz. Now we continue with the next Mishnah, again with a similar theme of the previous Mishnah regarding shloisha devarim, three things. Now it's not Tomer Gamliel. Here's Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah that he was matir, similar to Rabbi Gamliel who was lenient. V'cham make it forbidden. What are these three things? And these also continue on the theme of the laws of Yom Tov. Harasa Yaitza. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's cow would go out on Shabbos b'ritzua shebein karneha with a string between its horns for beauty. Now the Rabbanan held that it's a masay, it's carrying something because it's not a takshin. Mazari held that it's an adornment for the animal. The Chacham held that no, it's a burden. So therefore, Elizabeth Mazari permitted it. But again, the Chacham said it's forbidden. The second thing was umekardenes of him b'yamtiv. By Elizabeth Mazari, he permitted you to take an iron comb, which had thin, small teeth, even though it's going to make a chabur, it's going to make a wound. So you're allowed to comb the animal on yamtiv. And the third thing was b'sheichekin es hapelpelon berechem shalahem. You're allowed to grind the peppercorns in their designated mill, which according to Elazar Zari, he says that Teichin is included in the het of Eichel Nefesh, so therefore it's not a problem. Chacham said it's also because Teichin is not included in the het of Eichel Nefesh. So therefore that was the third thing. There was Machalik of Elazar Zari and the Chacham. Now Yehuda, he says that no, Ein Mekardenes Behim B'Yom Tov. He says you can't go ahead and do this kiruv, this combing of the animal on Yom Tov, because it makes a wound. Avol mekartzefin. But what you could do is kirtzev is similar. It's taking but a wooden comb that has thick teeth and it doesn't make a chabura. That Rabbi Yehuda says you're allowed to do. But they say no. We have three machlekes. They say no. Not only can you not do mekardim with the thin metal comb, but even you can't do mekartzefin even with the thick wooden comb. That's the three machlekes regarding combing an animal on Yom Tov. Now the Gemara asks regarding the opening halacha of our Mishnah. they said that Rabbi Nazari, he permitted his cow went out with a string between its horns, which Lacham say it's forbidden. Says well, remember the Rabbi Nazari, that's it. They had one cow. He's saying his cow in the singular. We go out with a red string between its horns. But V'amarav, some say Rabbi Yehuda Amarav, Tleisa Alfei Egli, 12,000 calves have ma'asr Rabbi Nazari. Rabbi Nazari would take meiser, which means only 1/10 me'edre from his flock, kol shad b'shad every single year. So obviously he's got much more than one cow. How can you say his cow? Says you want to tell in the Brisa, which actually discusses I was after the Churban, how the apostle even took meiser. It says that it wasn't in the spot right away, only later point in time. But Tana says the Gemara within the Brisa, actually the cow that went out with the red string wasn't his cow. It was his neighbor. But since he didn't protest against his neighbor, who she let her cow went out with the string, it was considered as if it was under his consent, and therefore he's held responsible for that, and therefore it's considered his opinion that he permitted it, and we actually even call it his cow. That's why it was called his cow, but really had many more cows than that. Next halacha on the Mishnah was that we said Rabbi Elazar ben Zar is matir, mekardnas behem b'yamtim, that you let it comb the animal, even though this might scratch the skin of the animal, cause a chabur. Elazar ben Zar held that it's mutter. So talking about the will in the Brisa, first it qualifies that there's two types of combs, as we mentioned in the Mishnah. Izehu kirud ve'ezu kirtza. What is kirud that according to some are asa, and what's kirtza, which according to there also some hold it's asa, some hold it's mutter. So kirud is ketanim, are talking about a metal comb with small teeth, va'is and chabura, which can make a wound. Kirtzuf, that's gedolim, those are wood comb with large teeth, ve'enos and chabura, and it doesn't won't make a wound. And begimah machlekes b'dav, and that's the three machlekes as we mentioned in the Mishnah. And what's the explanation of this three machlekes? So the Gemara explains. Yehuda Sabi holds davar regarding something that makes a wound, but it's she'ena miskaven, even though it's unintended. You're not trying to make a wound. Us, it can be forbidden. As Rabbi Yehuda l'shitasa in all of Shas, that miu. However, that concern is by kirud, which are ketanim, have small teeth, by sechabura, and they make a wound. So therefore, that's why Yehuda says you cannot be mekardim. But kirtzuf, that comb, are gedalim, are large teeth. They don't make a wound. But the gezrina kirtzuf of the kirud, Yehuda held that you don't make a gzeira to say that it should be forbidden by that of the big teeth because of that of the small teeth, and therefore he held mekartzuf and avle Now, Rabban Sabri, the Rabban hold, mekardim aloy mekartzuf. But the Rabban hold nami Rabbi Yehuda. They hold like Rabbi Yehuda leaning in the fact of davar shein miskaven is aser, that something that's unintended is going to be forbidden, and therefore they hold in mekardim. But they're even more stringent Rabbi Yehuda, because you're in kirtzafot the kirid, and they make zera that we don't let you use the small teeth, because then you might the big teeth, because then you might come to use the small teeth, and therefore that's why their opinion is in mekardim aflo mekartzafim. And then you have Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that's Saballah Rabbi Shimon. He was like Rabbi Shimon that Daf Yomi is kaven is mutter, as we also know his opinion throughout Shas, that if it's unintended, it's going to be permitted. Since you're not intending to make a chabura, even though sometimes it might happen, it's going to be permitted. And therefore, obeying kiwur to obeying kirtz of shari, therefore both combs, whether the big, large teeth one or the small teeth one, even though that might make a wound, that's going to be permitted. It was only Rav Nachman, not in the name of Shmuel. Halacha Rabbi Shimon, that he says in Masechta Shabbos, on Daf Chav Beis and Daf Mem Vav, that a person could drag his bed, his chair, his bench, all these things that are unintended, even though it might make charisha, might make a ditch, it's going to be permitted. And why do we rule like Rabbi Shimon? Like we see in our Mishnah, that he rules like him that you could do kirud even though it might make a wound, because it's Daf Hashem Miskav. Rav said to Rav Nachman, said over this teaching, but why does the master say otherwise? Why is Allah Rabbi Yehuda that Daf Hashem Miskav is going to be Aser Sher Chachamim Baitan Lai? When Rabbi Elazar is a Yachid, he's agreeing to Rabbi Shimon, but you have the Chacham, all the other sages that say like Rabbi Yehuda, that's Aser. So Amalei says, no, you're right. I'm not like Rabbi Shimon really. I hold like Rabbi Shimon. Therefore, I'm saying it's like Rabbi Shimon. But I'm just pointing out additionally, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah agrees to him. I'm not saying because he says like him, because if that would be the reason, then say like the Chachamim who they hold not like Rav Shimon, but no, he holds like Rav Shimon anyway, and notwithstanding, and then he's saying that additionally, the Chachamim say like that too. Now, the Gemara continues on Beis with, once we mentioned in the previous halacha regarding the machlekes, if you're allowed to grind the peppercorns in their special mill on Yom Tov, Elazar Mansari said it's permitted because Taichin is included. Chanevesh Chum says aser. So then we continue with another Mishnah that's related / unrelated. It discussed the laws of Tumah, but again, the Tumah Harichaim Shel Pilpalim regarding the pepper mill. So the Mishnah describes that Tameya, it's Makabel Tumah Mishum because of Shleisha Kalim. It has halachically, it's considered 3 different kalim in the same one pepper mill, which Rashi says the nafkamina is because if, let's say, that it loses one of them, it's still going to be tamei because of one of the other elements, which I was going to explain. Tais says differently. Tais says that if one part becomes tamei, the other parts do not automatically become tamei because they're considered 3 different kalim. So again, it's either one, it's either leniency or stringency of this halacha. What are these 3 different parts? So you have mishum kli kibul. The Gemara is going to explain what each one is. One of them is a receptacle, which that's makabel tumah. Mishum kli matris. One of them is a metal vessel, which is makabel tumah even when it's flat, when it's not a receptacle. Mishum kli chavara. And one of them is because it's like a sieve, like a sifter. So the Gemara explains these 3. Tanu lina braysa. Tachtoina, the bottom of these vessels, which that collects the pepper dust when it falls through the holes of the sieve. That's mishum klei kibul. That's going to be makabel tumah because it's a receptacle, and even if it's wood, as long as it has a receptacle, it's makabel tumah. And tzois, the middle one, which that surrounds the sieve, it's like a kli eitz, which meaning as a vessel itself would not be makabel tumah because the way Rashi explains it, Rashi says it doesn't really receive anything. Rather, he says mishum klei chavara. It's chacham will geyser tumah on the sieve because it's woven. So even if the mechber, this because you have to, that's how grinding works. You have the parts that are big pieces, they stay up and the dust comes out on the bottom. So even though it's not made out of metal, it's going to come because of a chlei chavar, because it's like similar to like a garment in the fact that it's like woven. So it says differently. It says because the big parts stay on top and the dust comes through the bottom, so it's like a kli kibul because it catches the stuff that are not going through when you're grinding it through. That's the middle one. And al yaina, the upper one, which that's where you grind the actual peppercorns. That's makabel tumah mishum klei matris, because of if it was wooden, it would not be makabel tumah, because since that upper one is flat, which I'm not even sure where it's describing this one, but somewhere over here is grinding it. If it was wooden, we're not makabel tumah because the pshutim, the flat wooden vessels, are tar. It's only because of on the bottom it's plated with metal, which is the primary, and the wood is bottled to it. So hence it's makabel tumah because of klei matris, which even though it's flat and it's not a receptacle, it's going to be makabel tumah because klei matris is makabel tumah even when it's flat. And even though there's wood there, that's secondary to the metal vessel. Next Mishnah continues also on this halachas of tumah. Agol cotton. Here it's talking about, actually like this Rashi and Taisus. Rashi says we're talking about like a child's toy wagon that they play with and they sit in it and you carry the child in that. Taisus says that no, because what would be the chiddush in this halacha that we're saying it's tmei medrus, that if, let's say, the way according to Rashi says if the child is a zav, then the wagon becomes an avatama because it's designated for the child sitting, because the child leans on it, comes as designated for his sitting in, and you don't say like, oh, get up, let's do our work with it, because if it wasn't designated for it, actually would not become an avatama, as the Beitzah teaches in Shabbos New Testament Aleph. You would think if you turned over a box that you have to use that, and someone's sitting in it, become tummy. No, we just say get off. We need to use it. Here it's made for the child to sit on, which Tais says obviously there's no kli more miyuchid than that for a child to sit on. So Tais actually says it's like a walker, which the child learns how to walk, and it's on like 3 wheels, and he holds on his hand and it's rolling in front of him, that's what Taisa says we're talking about the Agala Shal Cotton, which that's a little bit more of a chiddush. It's not meant to sit on, but since he leans on it, that says Taisa would have this halacha of it has Tameya Medris, that's one halacha. Additionally, B'Natelis B'Shabbos, it could be moved on Shabbos because it has halachic status of a kli. And the Ein and the Greris, it cannot be dragged on Shabbos, Ila Gabe Kalim, only on garments. The reason for that is because if you take it on the ground, it's going to make a ditch in the ground, and if you're digging a hole, it's chayv for chayrish. So if you can't take these wagons on the ground on Shabbos, which Rabbi Huda Aimer, as the Gemara actually will explain, it's actually two versions of Rabbi Huda. Kol Kalim in the ground, and he says, no, all vessels cannot be dragged on the ground because of the problem about chayrish. Chutz minagoli, actually, except for the wagon, Neshu Kaveshes, that actually you could drag on the ground because the ditch that you see when it's going on the ground is not through digging. It's by pressing and pushing the ground down beneath it. Comes out, its place is lower down, but that's not really moving the earth from its place. Digging is taking out the earth and moving it to the side. Here, when you're taking the wagon and just pushing it down, that's not considered chayrish, and therefore actually that would be permitted. Now the Gemara goes through these three halachas that were mentioned of this wagon of their child. A galish or cotton, he said the wagon of a child is Tmei Medris. The reason for that is because the Samach again, either according to Rashi or according to Tais, whichever one you want to say, the child is leaning on it and therefore has Tumas Medris. This always said in the tells B'Shabbos it can be moved on Shabbos, but Shem Dikateris Kalila has a status of vessel, it's not Muktzah. And this always said Be'in Negrez al Agabe Kalim, that you can only drag it only on, let's say, clothing, on garments on the tarp, which is Agabe Kalim in, only on garments, but Agabe Karkala, you cannot do it on the ground. Says Gemara, what's the reason? Why can't you do that? Because the Agabet Chavetz, because you're making a ditch. Says Gemara, who is that? It must be Rabbi Hudahi. Where the Amar, he says, someone that's unintended is going to be forbidden, because the ear of Shimon, if you think would go like Rabbi Shimon, Amar, he says, as we mentioned Amar Aleph, is Rabbi Shimon Shita throughout Shas, if it's unintended, even though it might go ahead and dig, it's going to be permitted. Titnan, which actually is a Braisa, Shimon he says, a person could drag meat, a bed, a kisa, a chair, a bench on the ground, but as long as he's not intending to make a ditch and it's not inevitable, it's going to be permitted. So it seems like that this halacha of the Tanakama in our Mishnah was Rabbi Huda. The problem is, look at the next words of the Mishnah. Rabbi Huda, then right after this halacha in our Mishnah, Rabbi Huda says, no, you're right. Generally, nothing, a bench or whatever it is, cannot be dragged in Shabbos. Except the wagon, which could be. Why? Because it actually is not digging, it's actually just pressing down the earth. Wait a second. So it sounds like Nisha Kaveshas in, because it's pressing down. But it doesn't make a ditch. So who's the Tanakama then? I thought that was Rabbi Huda, because Davashem is Gaban Zasa. Says the Gemara, Trey Tanoi believe Rabbi Huda. You're right, they're both going according to Rabbi Huda, but Machlig is Tanoi. One of them holds the Tanakama that the wagon is just like all other vessels, where it actually makes a ditch when you're pulling the wagon, because sometimes the wheel doesn't go so well, and it's going to get stuck in the earth, and it's going to actually pull out some of the earth. It's going to be digging. And even though it's Davashem Eskavim, it's going to be us. But the other Tana, which was the one who said Rabbi Huda Eimer, doesn't know it's not so common, and therefore it's only going to be pressing it beneath the wheel, and therefore that's why it's going to be permitted. So, but they're both going according to Rabbi Huda regarding if you say Davashem Eskavim is us. The question is the wheel of the wagon considered as chayrish, as chayrish, or not? Hanlach Yom Tov, we shall turn to the second paragraph of Masechtas Be'eh, Perek Yom Tov, which was speaking about the laws of Yom Tov, specifically Erev Tavshilin, and other malachas of Yom Tov, and that we begin the third Perek Ein Sudden, which, as Rashi gives an introduction, he says that even though shchita, slaughtering, fiyah, baking, cooking, they're all obvious malachas, and you're allowed to do them l'tzorech Yom Tov, and the reason for that is because you cannot do it from before Yom Tov. Why not? Because if you're going to shech the animal from before Yom Tov, we're concerned it's going to get spoiled, it's going to get ruined. But the malach of our mission of tzeidah, trapping, of hunting, you could trap it from before Yom Tov, and you can leave it in your own little, bucket of water, and it's not going to die. And tomorrow you can take the fish, and you don't have to do it on Yom Tov. Therefore, says Rashi, that's going to be forbidden to be done in Yom Tov, which Taisa disagrees. He says, what do you mean? We're going to echel nefesh. We already said in the beginning of this Masechta, and Daf Gimel and Al, we're not machalek if efshar of Yom Tov or efshar, and it's only by machshir and echel nefesh that we differentiate. Now we're going to echel nefesh. How can Rashi say that's the reason why you can't do tzad? So therefore, it says like Pirush Rach Mikinon that actually it's because it's similar to Ketzira. Ketzira are one of those that are not permitted, and Seder is similar to that. They're both detaching it from their sources, and therefore that's why you can't do Seder. So it's Machlekes Rishonim know exactly why, but Tzad is one of those malachas that we don't let doing because of Eichel Nefesh. Now that says the Mishnah with that introduction, Ain't Tzadin. You're not allowed to capture dugin fish min habivarin from the ponds of water b'yomtiv on yomtiv, and related halacha ve'ein noisen lefnehem. You're not allowed to put in front of the fish mezainis. You're not allowed to go out and feed them. As Rashi explains, it says even according to one that says on the previous daf we had mentioned on Daf Chafal Medaf that when it says oichel nefesh, it means any nefesh, which is even like we see behema is called nefesh behema, that you could feed your animals. That's only when mizayleisan alecha, when it's your responsibility to feed them. But fish, says Rashi, they're going to survive even without you feeding them, because they eat the roots of the grasses and on the ground, and the big fish eat the small fish. So therefore, you now go ahead and feed the fish. Taisa gives a different interpretation. Taisa says it's not really because of that Ein mizayleisan alecha, because Taisa says that, to the contrary, he says that actually two halachas are dependent one on the other. If you're allowed to capture a certain creature, then you're allowed to feed them. And what I was saying is that since you're not allowed to capture the fish, that's why you're not allowed to feed them. It's a gzeira, because if you feed them, you might come to capture them. And since it's not mutar and yomtiv, so that's why you can't feed them. So that's Taisus, he explains that's why you're not allowed to feed these like the fish, because you're not allowed to capture them. Now, that's regarding fish. Avol, but sudden chayiv. You could capture the wild animals and the birds that are gathered from yesterday, min habivarim, meaning the enclosure of the wild animals is like a karfif, which is it's fenced all around, and they gather inside of the wild animals and they grow up over there and you have them over there. Which the assumption right now is that since it's surrounded with a fence, so they're like already trapped already. But fish, even though they're in the pond, but they can slip away and get to the corners, and therefore for the fish it's considered as seder. But for the wild animals, since you have them already fenced in, therefore you're allowed to capture them because they're already considered as they're trapped. And also, but this name is you're allowed to go ahead and feed them, which Rashi explains. In the winter, they need to be fed, and even during the summertime, that if it's a place where people are stepping, so there's no grasses growing over there, and again, since they can't survive on their own, it would be considered as mizaynesan alecha. You have to feed them, and therefore you're allowed to go ahead and feed them. Now, Shloimy, he says, although we're saying that you go ahead and capture or not capture, depending if it's fish or wild animals from the beivarin, he says lo kol beivarin sham. He says not all enclosures are equal, and he says exactly. He says this is the rule, which the Gemara is going to explain exactly what is included in it. It says the rule is kol as getinta b'chavdal menalf hamachusid seder. If it's lacking trapping, meaning you still have to trap the creature, even though it's, let's say, an enclosed area, but it takes a while, you got to catch it. It's not just caught already. Then also then it's going to be asar. But if it's not lacking trapping, then mutar is going to be permitted. That's going to be the qualification of if it's going to be considered as tzad or not. Not necessarily if it's an enclosure or not. Depends. You could have a huge enclosure and it's like a whole reserve and the reservation. You're going to go have it. It's still going to be considered as trapping. That's according to Rabbi Shloimy, is going to be the qualification of it's a malach or not. Thank you to any time for hosting us.